The morning mist clung to the towers of Ravenspire Castle like gossip clings to the lips of courtiers. King Edmund Aldrich stood at the towering windows of his private study, watching the sun struggle to break through the gray clouds that seemed to mirror the shadows hanging over his reign. At 62, his once commanding presence had been weathered by years of difficult decisions, family scandals, and the constant pressure of ruling the kingdom of Astoria. His reflection in the ancient glass showed a man caught between two worlds, the duty he owed his crown, and the love he bore his family. The silver threads in his dark hair caught the dim light, and the lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights spent weighing impossible choices. Today would bring another such choice, though he didn't know it yet. Behind him, the study door creaked open with the familiar sound that announced the arrival of his most trusted advisor, Lord Chancellor Victoria Blackwood. She moved with the quiet efficiency that had made her indispensable over the past 15 years, carrying a leather portfolio that contained the day's most pressing matters. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice carrying the weight of urgency. "The Privy Council is assembled and waiting. The question of Princess Isabella's engagement to Duke Maximilian requires your immediate attention." Edmund turned from the window, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Princess Isabella, his beloved daughter-in-law, the woman who had brought light back into his son's eyes after the dark period following his first wife's death. The political marriage being proposed would secure crucial alliances with the neighboring kingdom of Valdres, but it would also tear apart the happiness that had slowly returned to the royal family. And Prince Alexander's position on this matter? Edmund asked, though he already knew the answer. His eldest son and heir had made his feelings abundantly clear during their heated discussion the previous evening. "The prince remains opposed, Your Majesty." Most vocally so. Victoria's diplomatic language barely concealed the reality of what had transpired. Prince Alexander had stormed from the council chambers, his face flushed with anger and his voice raised in a way that had shocked even the most seasoned courtiers. Edmund nodded slowly, his mind already working through the implications. The kingdom needed the alliance. The economic benefits and military security it would provide were undeniable. But forcing Isabella into a loveless marriage would destroy his son and potentially drive a permanent wedge between himself and the prince who would one day inherit his throne. As they walked through the corridors toward the council chambers, the castle seemed unusually quiet. Servants moved about their duties with downcast eyes, and even the usually bustling kitchen staff worked in subdued tones. Word of the royal family's conflict had spread throughout Ravenspire, creating an atmosphere of uncertainty that permeated every corner of the ancient fortress. The great hall stretched before them, its vaulted ceilings adorned with the banners of Astoria's noble houses. Today, however, the grandeur felt oppressive rather than inspiring. The long oak table at the center of the room was surrounded by the 12 members of the Privy Council, each representing different factions and interests within the kingdom. At the head of the table sat Duke Ferdinand Ravencrest, the Queen's brother and the most vocal supporter of the proposed marriage alliance. His piercing blue eyes and sharp features gave him an aristocratic bearing that commanded respect, but his political maneuvering had earned him as many enemies as allies. Beside him sat Lady Margaret Thornfield, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, whose extensive network of international contacts made her invaluable in matters of diplomacy. As Edmund took his seat at the head of the table, he could feel the tension radiating from every person present. These were not just political advisors, they were friends, confidants, and, in some cases, family members who found themselves on opposite sides of an impossible decision. "Gentlemen, ladies," Edmund began, his voice carrying the authority that had guided Astoria through 2 decades of prosperity and challenge. "We gather today to address a matter that affects not only our kingdom's future security, but the happiness of our royal family. I trust that each of you has given this matter the serious consideration it deserves." Duke Ferdinand leaned forward, his expression serious but determined. "Your Majesty, the benefits of this alliance cannot be overstated. Valdres possesses the largest iron deposits on the continent, and their military technology could revolutionize our defense capabilities. In an era of increasing international tension, we cannot afford to ignore such opportunities." Lady Margaret nodded in agreement, unrolling a map that showed the strategic positioning of both kingdoms. "Additionally, sire, the marriage would create a buffer zone against the aggressive expansion policies of the Eastern Empire. Princess Isabella's union with Duke Maximilian would signal to our enemies that Astoria is not isolated or vulnerable. But As the political arguments continued, Edmund's thoughts drifted to more personal considerations. He remembered the day Alexander had brought Isabella to court, how her laughter had filled the halls that had been silent for too long after the death of Alexander's first wife, Princess Catherine. Isabella had not only captured his son's heart, but had won over the entire court with her intelligence, compassion, and natural grace. What of Princess Isabella's own wishes in this matter? Asked Sir Thomas Whitmore, the Master of Laws, his weathered face showing the strain of trying to balance legal precedent with human compassion. Surely her consent must be considered. The question hung in the air like incense in a chapel, heavy and impossible to ignore. Everyone present knew that Isabella had made her feelings clear. She loved Prince Alexander deeply and had no desire to marry Duke Maximilian, regardless of the political benefits such a union might bring. Duke Ferdinand's response was swift and sharp. Sir Thomas, with respect, matters of state must sometimes supersede personal preference. The princess understood her obligations when she married into this family. Royal blood carries responsibilities that common people need not bear. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they contained an uncomfortable grain of truth. Royal marriages had always been political tools, used to secure alliances and conflicts, and strengthen kingdoms. Edmund himself had married Queen Cordelia not out of love, but out of duty, though affection had grown between them over the years. As the debate continued around the table, Edmund found his mind wandering to his wife, Queen Cordelia. She had been absent from court for the past month, claiming to need time for reflection at her family's ancestral estate. But everyone knew the real reason for her departure: the growing tension between her loyalty to her brother Ferdinand's political ambitions and her affection for Isabella, who had become like a daughter to her. The queen's absence had left a void in the palace that went beyond mere protocol. She had always been the heart of the royal family, the one who could smooth over conflicts with a gentle word or a knowing smile. Without her calming presence, the disagreements had escalated into something approaching a crisis. "Your Majesty," Lord Chancellor Blackwood interjected quietly, "perhaps we should hear from Prince Alexander directly. His perspective as the future king surely carries weight in this matter." Edmund nodded, though he dreaded the confrontation that would surely follow. Alexander had inherited his father's strong will and his mother's passionate nature, a combination that could be either inspiring or explosive, depending on the circumstances. A page was dispatched to summon the prince, and the council waited in uncomfortable silence. Through the tall windows, Edmund could see the royal gardens where Isabella often walked with her lady-in-waiting, Lady Caroline Ashford. The two young women had become inseparable friends, and Caroline's fierce loyalty to Isabella had made her an unexpected ally in the fight against the proposed marriage. When Prince Alexander finally entered the chamber, his presence immediately changed the atmosphere. At 35, he possessed the same commanding bearing as his father, but his dark eyes burned with barely contained anger. His usually immaculate appearance showed signs of strain, his hair slightly disheveled, his normally pristine uniform wrinkled from a sleepless night. "Father," he said, his voice carefully controlled but edged with steel, "I trust we are not here to discuss the same impossible proposal that was thoroughly rejected yesterday." Duke Ferdinand stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor. "Your Highness, this matter is far from settled. The security of our kingdom depends upon this alliance, and personal feelings cannot be allowed to override our duty to our people." Alexander's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Personal feelings? Uncle, you speak as though love and loyalty are weaknesses to be overcome rather than strengths to be cherished. Isabella has served this kingdom faithfully for 5 years. She has won the hearts of our people and proven herself worthy of their respect. Now you ask me to sacrifice her happiness, and my own, for the sake of political convenience." The prince moved to the window, his silhouette framed against the gray sky. "Tell me, Uncle, what kind of king would I be if I could not protect the woman I love? What kind of man would that make me in the eyes of our subjects?" Edmund watched his son with a mixture of pride and anguish. Alexander's words rang with truth and conviction, but they also revealed the idealism that could be both a blessing and a curse for a future monarch. The reality of kingship often demanded compromises that young princes could not yet understand. "Alexander," Edmund said quietly, "your feelings are not in question, but consider the broader picture. If we reject this alliance, Valdres may turn to our enemies. The consequences could be far more severe than the personal cost we pay today. The prince turned back to face the council, his expression a mixture of pain and determination. Then, let them turn to our enemies. Astoria has stood strong for 3 centuries without compromising our values. Are we so weak now that we must purchase security with the happiness of our family? Lady Margaret cleared her throat delicately. Your Highness, perhaps there are other ways to secure Princess Isabella's cooperation. The Duke Maximilian is known to be a reasonable man, and the marriage need not be burdensome. Many royal couples have found contentment in unions that began as political arrangements. Isabella's voice cut through the chamber like a sword through silk. I beg your pardon, Lady Margaret, but I believe I should speak for myself in this matter. Every head turned toward the chamber doors, where Princess Isabella stood with her chin raised and her green eyes blazing with quiet fury. She had obviously been listening from the corridor, and her entrance brought a stunned silence to the room. Lady Caroline stood behind her, her face pale but determined. Isabella moved into the chamber with the grace that had made her a favorite at court, but her beauty was now armored with a dignity that commanded immediate respect. At 28, she possessed an intelligence that rivaled any member of the council, and her years as a princess had taught her the intricacies of political maneuvering. Your Majesty, she said, curtsying deeply to Edmund before turning to address the entire council. I have listened to your debate with great interest, and I believe it is time for you to hear directly from the person whose life you are planning with such careful consideration. Duke Ferdinand's face reddened with anger. Princess Isabella, this is highly irregular. These proceedings are not what, Your Grace. Isabella interrupted, her voice remaining calm, but carrying an underlying steel that silenced all protest. Not suitable for the woman whose future is being decided? Not appropriate for the princess who has served this kingdom faithfully and without complaint for 5 years? Or simply not convenient for your political calculations? Edmund found himself torn between admiration for Isabella's courage and concern for the precedent her intervention might set. Royal protocol had been carefully developed over centuries to prevent exactly this kind of emotional confrontation in formal proceedings. But, as Isabella continued to speak, her words carried a weight that transcended protocol. I stand before you not just as Prince Alexander's wife, but as a daughter of this kingdom who has earned the right to be heard. You speak of duty and sacrifice as though I am unfamiliar with these concepts. Yet I have spent every day of the past 5 years fulfilling my obligations to this crown and to our people. She moved to stand beside Alexander, and the sight of them together, united in their defiance, created a powerful image that resonated through the chamber. I have visited every province of our kingdom, learned the names and concerns of our subjects, and worked tirelessly to represent Astoria with honor in every diplomatic encounter. I have earned my place in this family through service, not through political convenience. Lady Caroline stepped forward, her voice clear and strong despite her obvious nervousness. Your Majesty, if I may speak on behalf of Princess Isabella's character. In my 5 years as her companion, I have witnessed her dedication to this kingdom's welfare. She has never once placed her personal desires above her royal duties. Surely such loyalty deserves to be repaid with consideration for her happiness. The chamber fell silent as the weight of Isabella's words and Caroline's testimony settled over the assembled council. Edmund looked around the table and saw his advisors grappling with the human cost of their political calculations. These were not abstract figures on a diplomatic chessboard. These were real people whose lives would be fundamentally altered by the decisions made in this room. Sir Thomas Whitmore spoke first, his voice heavy with the weight of his years. Princess Isabella, your words carry great weight with this council. But surely you understand the larger issues at stake. The security of our kingdom affects not just our family, but every subject under our protection. Isabella nodded gravely. Sir Thomas, I understand the stakes far better than you might imagine. But I would ask you to consider this. What message does it send to our people if we sacrifice love and loyalty for the sake of political expedience? What kind of kingdom are we protecting if we abandon our most fundamental values in the process? Prince Alexander moved closer to his wife, his hand finding hers in a gesture that spoke volumes about their partnership. Isabella speaks with wisdom that puts us all to shame. We are so focused on protecting our kingdom from external threats that we risk destroying it from within. Duke Ferdinand's patience finally snapped. Enough of this romantic nonsense. The decision has already been made by wiser heads than yours, nephew. The princess will marry Duke Maximilian, and that is the end of the matter." The harsh words hung in the air like a challenge, and Edmund felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. His brother-in-law's authoritarian approach had pushed the conflict to a breaking point, and the king knew that his next words would determine whether his family could be healed or whether it would be fractured beyond repair. Alexander's face had gone white with rage, and Edmund could see his son preparing to issue an ultimatum that would force an irrevocable choice between crown and family. Isabella's hand tightened on her husband's arm, her own face pale but resolute. In that moment, Edmund realized that all his years of experience, all his political wisdom, and all his carefully cultivated relationships meant nothing if he could not find a way to bridge this growing chasm. The kingdom needed the alliance, but it also needed a royal family united in purpose and bound by love. The chamber fell completely silent as everyone waited for the king to speak. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, casting long shadows across the ancient stones of Ravenspire Castle. The decision Edmund made in the next few moments would echo through the generations, shaping not just the immediate future of his family, but the very character of the kingdom he had spent his life protecting. As he opened his mouth to speak, a commotion in the corridor outside interrupted the tense standoff. The sound of running footsteps and urgent voices carried through the heavy oak doors, suggesting that whatever crisis was unfolding in the chamber was about to be overshadowed by news from beyond the castle walls. The massive doors burst open, and a royal messenger stumbled into the chamber, his face flushed with exhaustion and his uniform mud-stained from hard riding. In his trembling hand, he clutched a sealed parchment bearing the royal arms of Valdres, news that would change everything the council thought they knew about the proposed alliance. Edmund's heart sank as he recognized the urgency in the messenger's eyes. Whatever news the young man carried, it would not make the current crisis easier to resolve. The king gestured for the messenger to approach, steeling himself for yet another complication in an already impossible situation. "Your Majesty," the messenger gasped, still struggling to catch his breath from his urgent ride. "Urgent news from the court of Valdres. Duke Maximilian. Your Majesty, Duke Maximilian is dead." The words struck the chamber like lightning, instantly transforming the heated debate into stunned silence. Duke Maximilian, the man whose marriage to Princess Isabella had dominated their discussions for weeks, was dead. The carefully constructed political alliance that had threatened to tear the royal family apart had just crumbled with the delivery of a single message. Edmund felt the world shift beneath his feet as he processed the implications. The messenger stood before him, swaying slightly from exhaustion, the sealed parchment still clutched in his trembling hand. Around the council table, faces reflected a mixture of shock, relief, and growing concern about what this news might mean for Astoria's future. "How?" Edmund asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question carried the weight of a kingdom's foreign policy hanging in the balance. The messenger straightened as much as his exhausted state would allow. "Your Majesty, Duke Maximilian was killed 3 days ago in what appears to have been a hunting accident. His horse threw him during a wild boar hunt, and he struck his head against a fallen tree. The court physicians could do nothing to save him." Prince Alexander's hand tightened around Isabella's, and Edmund could see the relief flooding across both their faces. The immediate threat to their marriage had been removed by fate, but the king's experienced mind was already working through the larger implications. Duke Maximilian's death didn't eliminate Astoria's need for allies. It merely complicated the diplomatic landscape in ways that were not yet clear. Duke Ferdinand was the first to recover his voice, though it carried none of its usual commanding tone. "This changes everything. The alliance with Valdres, the military technology we hope to access, the strategic partnership, all of it is now uncertain." Lady Margaret leaned forward, her diplomatic training helping her process the new information more quickly than the others. "Your Majesty, we need to understand the succession laws in Valdres. Duke Maximilian was unmarried and had no direct heirs, but there may be cousins or other relatives who could inherit his titles and his commitment to our proposed alliance." The messenger nodded wearily. "My lady, that information is included in the formal dispatch. Duke Maximilian's younger brother, Prince Henrik, is expected to inherit the duchy. However, Prince Henrik has been vocal in his opposition to foreign alliances, preferring to focus on internal development rather than international partnerships." Edmund closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of yet another complication. Prince Henrik's isolationist policies were well known throughout the diplomatic community, and His ascension would likely mean the end of any hope for the strategic alliance that Astoria desperately needed. Sir Thomas Whitmore cleared his throat thoughtfully. Your Majesty, while this news certainly complicates our international position, it does resolve the immediate crisis within our own family. Perhaps we should take a moment to be grateful for that before we begin worrying about new challenges. Isabella stepped forward, her voice clear and strong despite the emotional weight of the moment. Your Majesty, if I may speak freely, I want to express my profound sorrow at the news of Duke Maximilian's death. While I cannot pretend to mourn the end of our proposed marriage, I am genuinely grieved by the loss of a young man who was, by all accounts, honorable and well regarded by his people. Her words carried a dignity that reminded everyone present why she had become so beloved at court. Even in the moment of her greatest relief, Isabella's first thought was for the human cost of the tragedy rather than her own liberation from an unwanted fate. Alexander nodded in agreement with his wife's sentiments. Father, Isabella speaks for both of us. Duke Maximilian's death is a tragedy for Valdres, and we should ensure that our response reflects appropriate respect for their loss, regardless of how it affects our own situation. Edmund looked at his son and daughter-in-law with renewed appreciation for their character. In the heat of political maneuvering, it would have been easy to focus solely on their own relief, but they had maintained their moral compass even in the midst of crisis. You both speak with wisdom and compassion, Edmund said, his voice carrying both pride and sorrow. We will, of course, send our formal condolences to the Valdres court, along with a diplomatic mission to assess how this tragedy affects our broader relationship with their kingdom. Duke Ferdinand, however, was already thinking beyond expressions of sympathy. Your Majesty, we cannot allow sentiment to cloud our judgment. Duke Maximilian's death eliminates one potential alliance, but it also creates new opportunities. Perhaps Prince Henrik might be more receptive to a different kind of partnership, one that doesn't require a marriage alliance. Lady Margaret unrolled a fresh map, this one showing the broader political landscape of the region. Additionally, sire, there are other potential partners we should consider. The Kingdom of Luminora has been seeking closer ties with Astoria, and their mineral wealth could provide similar strategic benefits to those we hope to gain from Valdres. As the council began discussing alternative diplomatic strategies, Edmund found his attention drawn to a deeper concern. The death of Duke Maximilian, while resolving the immediate family crisis, had highlighted the fundamental vulnerability that had driven the proposed alliance in the first place. Astoria needed partners, and the kingdom's isolation in an increasingly dangerous world remained a pressing problem. Queen Cordelia's absence felt more acute than ever in this moment. Her diplomatic skills and intuitive understanding of court politics would have been invaluable in navigating this new landscape. Edmund made a mental note to send word to her immediately, both to inform her of the changed circumstances and to request her urgent return to court. Lord Chancellor Victoria Blackwood had been quietly taking notes throughout the discussion, and now she looked up with a practical concern. Your Majesty, we should also consider the domestic implications of these events. Word of Duke Maximilian's death will spread throughout our kingdom, and our subjects will naturally wonder how this affects the stability of our government and our foreign relations. The observation was astute and important. The people of Astoria had been following the royal family's conflict with great interest, and many had formed strong opinions about Princess Isabella's proposed marriage. The news of Duke Maximilian's death would be met with relief by those who opposed the alliance, and concern by those who supported it for economic reasons. Sir Thomas Whitmore nodded in agreement. Lady Blackwood raises an excellent point. We need to craft a careful public message that acknowledges the tragedy while reassuring our people that Astoria's security and prosperity remain our highest priorities. Prince Alexander stepped forward, his earlier anger now replaced by thoughtful determination. Father, if I may suggest, perhaps this is an opportunity for our family to demonstrate our unity and strength. The past weeks have shown our subjects a royal family in conflict. Now we can show them a family that stands together in the face of unexpected challenges. Isabella nodded enthusiastically at her husband's suggestion. Your Majesty, Prince Alexander speaks wisely. Perhaps a public appearance together, demonstrating our family's solidarity, would reassure our people that the kingdom remains stable despite the international uncertainty. Edmund considered the proposal carefully. A public display of family unity would indeed send a powerful message, both to their own subjects and To foreign observers who might be tempted to view the Duke's death as an opportunity to exploit Astoria's diplomatic isolation. Your suggestion has merit, Edmund said slowly. But we must be careful not to appear to be celebrating Duke Maximilian's death, even inadvertently. Our public message must balance relief at our family's reconciliation with appropriate respect for the tragedy that has befallen Valdres. Duke Ferdinand shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly struggling with the collapse of his carefully planned diplomatic strategy. Your Majesty, while family unity is certainly important, we cannot allow it to distract us from the very real security challenges that Duke Maximilian's death has created. We are now more isolated than ever, and our enemies will not hesitate to take advantage of our vulnerability. The Duke's words carried uncomfortable truth, and Edmund knew that the celebration of his family's reunion would have to be tempered by the hard realities of statecraft. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but larger challenges loomed on the horizon. Lady Caroline, who had remained quietly in the background throughout most of the discussion, suddenly stepped forward with an unexpected insight. Your Majesty, forgive my presumption, but I wonder if we might be approaching this situation from the wrong perspective entirely. All eyes turned to the young woman, whose usual role was to provide companionship to Isabella rather than political advice. But Edmund had learned over the years that wisdom could come from unexpected sources, and Lady Caroline's close relationship with Isabella had given her unique insights into the royal family's dynamics. Please, Lady Caroline, share your thoughts, Edmund encouraged, curious to hear what fresh perspective she might offer. Caroline took a deep breath, clearly nervous about speaking so boldly in such august company. Your Majesty, it seems to me that our approach to these alliances has been focused on what Astoria needs from other kingdoms. But perhaps we should be asking what we have to offer that others desperately need. The observation struck the chamber with unexpected force. In all their diplomatic calculations, they had indeed been focused primarily on Astoria's vulnerabilities rather than its strengths. The kingdom's strategic location, its skilled artisans, its stable government, and its reputation for honor were all valuable assets that could be leveraged in negotiations. Lady Margaret's eyes lit up with recognition. Lady Caroline makes an excellent point. Astoria's neutrality in the recent conflicts between the Eastern Empire and the Western Alliance has actually enhanced our value as a mediator and trading partner. We've been thinking like supplicants when we should be thinking like equals. Prince Alexander looked at Lady Caroline with newfound respect. Caroline, your insight could transform our entire diplomatic approach. Instead of seeking marriages and military alliances born of desperation, we could be offering partnerships based on mutual benefit and shared prosperity. Isabella beamed with pride at her companion's contribution. Lady Caroline has always possessed remarkable clarity of thought. Perhaps it took someone outside the traditional diplomatic circles to see what we've been missing. Edmund felt a surge of hope that had been absent from his thoughts for weeks. The young woman's observation had indeed highlighted a fundamental flaw in their approach to international relations. Astoria's strengths were considerable, and, properly leveraged, they could provide security through prosperity rather than through military alliances. Sir Thomas Whitmore leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Your Majesty, if we pursue Lady Caroline's approach, we might find that our current crisis becomes the foundation for a stronger, more independent foreign policy than we had ever imagined possible. Duke Ferdinand, however, remained skeptical. These ideas are all very inspiring, but they don't address the immediate reality of our military vulnerability. Words and trade agreements cannot stop armies if our enemies decide to test our resolve. The Duke's practical concerns couldn't be dismissed, but Edmund was beginning to see a path forward that hadn't been visible before. Ferdinand, your military concerns are valid, but perhaps we've been too focused on traditional approaches to defense. A kingdom that is indispensable to its neighbors for trade and diplomacy is often safer than one that relies solely on military might. As the discussion continued, a new sense of possibility began to permeate the chamber. The death of Duke Maximilian, while tragic, had forced them to reconsider their assumptions and explore new approaches to Astoria's challenges. The messenger, who had been waiting patiently throughout the lengthy discussion, cleared his throat softly. Your Majesty, if I may, there is additional information in the formal dispatch that might be relevant to your discussions. Edmund gestured for him to continue, curious about what other complications or opportunities the Valdres correspondence might contain. Sire, Prince Henrik has specifically requested that Astoria send a diplomatic mission to discuss new forms of cooperation that do not involve traditional military or marriage alliances. It appears that he, too, may be interested in exploring alternative approaches to international relations. The revelation sent a ripple of excitement through the chamber. Prince Henrik's request suggested that the diplomatic revolution Lady Caroline had inspired might be shared by other forward-thinking leaders in the region. Lady Margaret immediately began calculating the implications. Your Majesty, if Prince Henrik is genuinely interested in innovative partnerships, this could be the beginning of an entirely new diplomatic era. Instead of the old system of marriages and military pacts, we could be pioneering a new approach based on economic cooperation and cultural exchange. Prince Alexander's excitement was evident in his voice. Father, this is exactly the kind of leadership that our kingdom needs to provide. Instead of following the old patterns that have led to endless conflicts, we can show the world a better way forward. Isabella nodded enthusiastically. And our own people would be proud to see Astoria leading such positive change rather than simply reacting to threats and managing crises. Edmund looked around the chamber and saw something that had been missing for weeks: genuine optimism and a shared sense of purpose. The crisis that had threatened to tear his family apart had somehow transformed into an opportunity for the kingdom to chart a new course. Lord Chancellor Blackwood, ever practical, raised a crucial point. Your Majesty, if we're going to pursue this new diplomatic approach, we'll need to move quickly to establish our credibility. Other kingdoms will need to see concrete evidence that our offers of partnership are genuine and beneficial. Duke Ferdinand, while still cautious, was beginning to be swayed by the enthusiasm around the table. If we're going to take this risk, we need to ensure that our first diplomatic initiatives are overwhelmingly successful. Failure would leave us worse off than we started. Edmund stood slowly, feeling the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. The path forward was clearer now, but it would require courage, wisdom, and careful execution. More importantly, it would require the united effort of a royal family that had nearly been torn apart by the very conflicts they were now determined to resolve. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying the authority and conviction that had guided Astoria through 2 decades of prosperity, we stand at a crossroads. Duke Maximilian's death has freed us from an alliance that would have compromised our values, but it has also challenged us to find a better way forward. I believe we have found that way, thanks to the wisdom shared in this chamber today. He looked directly at Isabella and Alexander, seeing in their faces the love and determination that had inspired the entire discussion. Our family's unity will be the foundation upon which we build these new partnerships. The world will see that Astoria's strength comes not from fear or desperation, but from the bonds of love and loyalty that unite us. The chamber erupted in a buzz of excited conversation as the implications of the new direction began to sink in. For the first time in weeks, the atmosphere in the palace was one of hope rather than anxiety, possibility rather than crisis. But even as Edmund felt a surge of optimism about the future, he knew that the real work was just beginning. Transforming diplomatic theory into practical reality would require all of their skills, and the eyes of the world would be watching to see whether Astoria's bold new approach would succeed or fail catastrophically. As the council meeting began to wind down, Edmund's thoughts turned to Queen Cordelia. Her return to court had become even more urgent now that they were embarking on such an ambitious new direction. Her wisdom, her diplomatic experience, and her ability to unite the family would be essential to their success. The king's hand moved unconsciously to the pocket where he kept her latest letter, filled with words of love and encouragement, but also with gentle warnings about the dangers of letting political necessities override human values. Soon, he hoped, she would be back at his side, helping to guide their kingdom through the transformation that lay ahead. 3 days after the stunning news of Duke Maximilian's death, Ravenspire Castle buzzed with unprecedented activity. The transformation from crisis to opportunity had energized the entire court, and preparation for Astoria's bold new diplomatic initiative consumed every waking moment. Yet beneath the excitement, King Edmund wrestled with a growing unease that he couldn't quite articulate. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the royal apartments as Edmund reviewed the latest diplomatic correspondence from across the continent. Reports from his ambassadors painted a complex picture of a world in transition, where traditional alliances were crumbling and new partnerships were desperately needed. Lady Caroline's insight about leveraging Astoria's strengths rather than focusing on its weaknesses had proven remarkably prescient. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and Isabella entered with a grace that seemed to light up the room. In the 3 days since the crisis had passed, she had thrown herself into the diplomatic preparations with an enthusiasm that impressed even the most experienced courtiers. "Your Majesty," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk with the easy familiarity that had developed over their 5 years as family. "I wanted to discuss the cultural exchange proposals that Lady Margaret and I have been developing. I believe they could be the key to making our new approach truly revolutionary." Edmund set aside his correspondence, grateful for both the interruption and Isabella's perspective. Her intelligence and creativity had always been among her greatest assets, but the recent crisis had revealed depths of strategic thinking that even he hadn't fully appreciated. "Please, tell me more about these proposals," he encouraged, noting the excitement in her green eyes. Isabella leaned forward enthusiastically. "Your Majesty, we've been thinking too narrowly about what diplomatic relationships could encompass. Instead of focusing solely on trade agreements and military pacts, what if we created exchanges of scholars, artists, and craftsmen? Imagine the knowledge and innovation that could flow between our kingdoms if we removed the traditional barriers." The concept was intriguing, and Edmund could see how it might appeal to leaders like Prince Henrik who were wary of conventional alliances. Such exchanges could indeed create bonds that go deeper than mere political convenience, he mused. But they would also require a level of trust that might be difficult to establish initially. "That's exactly why they would be so powerful," Isabella replied with growing excitement. "Anyone can sign a treaty and break it when circumstances change. But when your scholars are learning in another kingdom's universities, when your artists are creating works that celebrate shared values, when your craftsmen are teaching their skills to foreign apprentices, those bonds become much more difficult to sever." The wisdom of her approach was undeniable, but Edmund found himself thinking about the practical challenges. The logistics would be enormous, and the initial costs significant. "Our treasury is stable, but not unlimited." Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "Lady Margaret, and I have been working on that problem as well. What if the exchanges were initially small and focused on areas where we could demonstrate immediate mutual benefit? For example, our master weavers could share their techniques with Luminoran artisans in exchange for access to their new dyeing methods. The economic benefits would help fund larger programs." Before Edmund could respond, Prince Alexander burst into the room with barely contained excitement. His usual formal demeanor had been replaced by an energy that reminded his father of Alexander's youth, when the weight of royal responsibility hadn't yet settled on his shoulders. "Father, Isabella, you must hear what Lord Chancellor Blackwood has just reported," Alexander said, barely pausing to acknowledge protocol. 3 more kingdoms have sent in formal inquiries about Astoria's new diplomatic approach. Word is spreading faster than we anticipated. Edmund felt a mixture of excitement and concern at his son's news. Rapid interest could be beneficial, but it could also lead to unrealistic expectations and potential complications. Which kingdoms, and what specifically are they asking about? "Meridia, Thornhold, and, most surprisingly, the eastern province of Drakmore," Alexander replied, consulting a hastily written note. "They're all asking about economic partnerships and cultural exchanges. Apparently, the traditional alliance system has left many smaller kingdoms feeling trapped between larger powers." Isabella's eyes widened with recognition. "The eastern province of Drakmore has been caught between the Eastern Empire and the Western Alliance for decades. If we could offer them a third option, it would be incredibly significant." Edmund's strategic mind immediately began calculating the implications. Drakmore's location made it crucial to trade routes between the eastern and western parts of the continent. A partnership with them could position Astoria at the center of a new economic network that transcended traditional political boundaries. "We need to be very careful here," Edmund cautioned, his experience making him wary of moving too quickly. "Success with one kingdom is manageable, but if we overextend ourselves trying to negotiate with multiple partners simultaneously, we risk failure across the board." Alexander nodded, his initial excitement tempered by his father's wisdom. "You're absolutely right. But, Father, don't you see what this means? We're not just solving Astoria's diplomatic isolation. We're potentially creating a new model for how kingdoms can relate to each other." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Chancellor Blackwood, whose usually composed demeanor showed signs of barely controlled excitement. "Your Majesty, I apologize for the intrusion, but I have news that requires your immediate attention." Edmund gestured for her to continue, noting the formal tone that suggested either very good or very bad news. "Sire, Queen Cordelia has returned to court and is requesting an immediate private audience," Blackwood announced. "However, she has not returned alone. She brings with her Lady Evangeline of Meridia, who claims to represent her kingdom's interests in exploring new forms of diplomatic partnership." The revelation struck the room like lightning. Queen Cordelia's return was welcome news, but her arrival with a foreign diplomat suggested that she had been far from idle during her month-long absence from court. Edmund felt a surge of both relief and curiosity about what his wife might have accomplished during her time away. "Where are they now?" Edmund asked, already rising from his chair. "The Queen is in her private chambers, refreshing herself from the journey. Lady Evangeline is in the blue guest suite, awaiting your pleasure," Blackwood replied. "The Queen specifically requested that she be allowed to speak with you privately before any formal diplomatic meetings begin." Alexander and Isabella exchanged glances, both clearly recognizing the significance of these developments. Queen Cordelia's diplomatic skills were legendary, and her personal connections throughout the continent made her an invaluable asset in any international negotiation. "Please inform the Queen that I will attend her immediately," Edmund said, "and ensure that Lady Evangeline is provided with every courtesy while she waits." As Blackwood departed to carry out his instructions, Edmund turned to his son and daughter-in-law. "This changes everything. If Cordelia has been working on diplomatic initiatives during her absence, she may have laid groundwork that could accelerate our entire program." Isabella's face showed both excitement and concern. "Your Majesty, this is wonderful news, but it also means we need to coordinate our efforts very carefully. We can't have different members of the royal family pursuing conflicting diplomatic strategies." Alexander nodded in agreement. "Father, perhaps this is an opportunity for our family to demonstrate the unity that we've rediscovered. If we can present a coordinated approach to these new partnerships, it will show other kingdoms that Astoria's new direction is serious and sustainable." Edmund felt a surge of pride at his son's maturity and wisdom. The crisis of the past weeks had forced Alexander to grow as both a prince and a future king, and the results were impressive. The walk to Queen Cordelia's chambers gave Edmund time to consider the implications of her unexpected return. Their marriage had always been a partnership in both personal and political terms, and her absence had left a void that went far beyond mere protocol. Her ability to see connections and possibilities that others missed had been crucial to many of Astoria's past diplomatic successes. Queen Cordelia's private chambers occupied the tower that overlooked the royal gardens, and the afternoon lights streaming through the tall windows created an almost ethereal atmosphere as Edmund entered. His wife stood at the window, her silhouette framed against the garden where Isabella often walked. At 45, Queen Cordelia retained the grace and beauty that had made her the most sought-after diplomat of her generation, but her eyes now carried a wisdom born of experience and careful observation. "Edmund," she said, turning to face him with a smile that seemed to encompass both relief and anticipation. "I have missed you terribly, but I believe my time away has been well spent." He crossed the room to embrace her, feeling the tension of the past weeks begin to dissolve. "Cordelia, your return couldn't be more perfectly timed. We have much to discuss, and I suspect that your own activities may complement what we've been developing here." She led him to the comfortable sitting area near the fireplace, where they had shared countless private conversations over their 20 years of marriage. "Before we discuss diplomatic strategies, I need to know how our family has weathered the recent crisis. Your letters suggested that things were very difficult before Duke Maximilian's death." Edmund settled beside her, grateful for the opportunity to share both his concerns and his newfound optimism. "The crisis was indeed severe, and for a time I feared that our family might be permanently fractured. But sometimes tragedy can reveal unexpected wisdom. Duke Maximilian's death freed us from an alliance that would have compromised our values, and it also forced us to reconsider our entire approach to international relations." He proceeded to describe the council meeting where Lady Caroline's insight had transformed their perspective, and how the family's unity had been restored through their shared commitment to a new diplomatic vision. Cordelia listened intently, her expressions shifting between concern for the pain her family had endured and excitement about the possibilities they had discovered. "Edmund, what you're describing is remarkable," she said when he had finished. "It seems that our individual efforts have been moving in the same direction, even though we've been apart. During my time at my family's estate, I wasn't simply seeking solitude. I was quietly exploring whether other kingdoms might be receptive to new approaches to international cooperation." Edmund's eyes widened with understanding. "Lady Evangeline's presence suggests that your explorations were successful." Cordelia nodded, her eyes bright with excitement. "Evangeline represents a faction within Meridia that has grown increasingly frustrated with their kingdom's isolation between larger powers. They've been seeking alternatives to the traditional alliance system, and when I described what Astoria might be willing to offer, she convinced her government to send her here immediately." The implications were staggering. Instead of pursuing multiple initiatives separately, they could coordinate their efforts to create something truly revolutionary, a new form of international partnership that could serve as a model for the entire continent. "Cordelia, this is extraordinary," Edmund said, feeling a surge of excitement that matched what he had seen in Alexander and Isabella. "If we can demonstrate success with Meridia, it could provide the credibility we need for the other inquiries we've received." "There's more," Cordelia continued, her voice dropping to a more confidential tone. "Evangeline brings with her preliminary proposals for what she calls living partnerships, agreements that grow and evolve based on mutual benefit rather than fixed terms dictated by political necessity." Edmund leaned forward, intrigued by the concept. "Can you be more specific about what these living partnerships would entail?" Cordelia stood and moved to her writing desk, returning with a leather portfolio. "Evangeline has brought detailed proposals covering everything from joint research projects to shared cultural festivals. The idea is to create relationships that become stronger over time rather than more brittle." As she spread the documents across the table between them, Edmund could see the careful thought and planning that had gone into the proposals. These weren't vague diplomatic concepts. They were practical frameworks for cooperation that could be implemented immediately. "The most intriguing aspect," Cordelia continued, "is their proposal for what they call graduated sovereignty in certain areas. For example, joint administration of trade routes, shared environmental protection initiatives, and coordinated responses to natural disasters." Edmund studied the documents with growing amazement. The Meridian proposals went far beyond anything he and his council had envisioned, yet they aligned perfectly with the direction Lady Caroline's insights had suggested. "This could work," he said slowly, his mind already calculating the political and practical implications. "But it would require a level of trust and cooperation that has never been attempted on this scale." Cordelia returned to sit beside him, her expression serious but hopeful. "Edmund, I believe we're at a unique moment in history. The old system of constant competition and mutual suspicion has left everyone exhausted and vulnerable. Smaller kingdoms like ours have been caught in the middle of larger conflicts for too long. Perhaps it's time to show the world that there's a better way." Before Edmund could respond, a gentle knock at the door announced the arrival of Alexander and Isabella. With Cordelia's permission, they entered and were immediately drawn into the discussion of the Meridian proposals. Isabella's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "Your Majesty, these ideas are brilliant. They address exactly the concerns that Lady Caroline raised about creating partnerships based on shared strength rather than mutual weakness." Alexander nodded in agreement, but his expression showed the caution that came with his growing understanding of statecraft. "Mother, these proposals are inspiring, but they also represent enormous risks. If we commit to this level of cooperation and then fail, the consequences could be catastrophic." Cordelia smiled at her son's practical wisdom. "Alexander, you're absolutely right to be cautious. But consider this. The traditional approach to international relations has already failed. The Eastern Empire and the Western Alliance are locked in a Cold War that benefits no one. Smaller kingdoms are being forced to choose sides in conflicts that don't serve their interests. We're not just taking a risk with these new approaches. We're offering an escape from a system that was already destroying us." The family spent the next hour reviewing the Meridian proposals in detail, discussing how they might be modified to address Astoria's specific circumstances and capabilities. The more they talked, the more convinced Edmund became that they had discovered something truly revolutionary. As evening approached, the conversation turned to practical next steps. Lady Evangeline would need to be received formally, but they also needed to coordinate their response with the other diplomatic inquiries they had received. "Father," Alexander said thoughtfully, I think we should consider hosting a gathering of representatives from all the interested kingdoms. Instead of pursuing separate negotiations, we could demonstrate our new approach by bringing everyone together to explore mutual opportunities. Isabella's eyes lit up with excitement. A diplomatic summit based on collaboration rather than competition. It would be unprecedented, and success would establish Astoria as the leader of a completely new movement in international relations. Cordelia nodded enthusiastically. Evangeline mentioned that other kingdoms have been having similar conversations. A summit could provide the catalyst that transforms individual initiatives into a broader transformation. Edmund felt the pieces falling into place in his mind. A summit would be risky, but it would also provide an opportunity to demonstrate their new approach on a scale that would capture the attention of the entire continent. The logistics would be enormous, he said slowly, but the potential impact could justify the effort. If we're going to do this, we need to ensure that it's organized flawlessly. One failure could discredit the entire concept. As the family continued planning, Edmund felt a sense of purpose and unity that had been missing from the palace for weeks. The crisis that had nearly torn them apart had instead become the foundation for the most ambitious initiative in Astoria's history. The evening shadows grew longer as they worked, but the energy in the room seemed to grow brighter with each new idea. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they began the delicate process of transforming vision into reality. But tonight, the royal family of Astoria was united in hope and determination like never before. 2 weeks had passed since Queen Cordelia's dramatic return with Lady Evangeline, and Ravenspire Castle had been transformed into a hive of diplomatic activity. Representatives from 6 kingdoms now graced the ancient halls, each bringing their own hopes, fears, and ambitious proposals for the revolutionary summit that had captured the imagination of the entire continent. King Edmund stood in his private study as dawn broke over the castle grounds, watching servants prepare the great hall for what would either be remembered as a historic triumph or a catastrophic failure. In just 3 hours, the first formal session of the Conference of New Alliances would begin, and the weight of expectation from both his own people and the watching world pressed heavily on his shoulders. The 2 weeks of preparation had been a whirlwind of late-night negotiations, careful protocol discussions, and the delicate balancing of competing interests and personalities. Each delegation had arrived with their own vision of what the new diplomatic order should look like, and finding common ground had required all of the royal family's considerable diplomatic skills. Lady Evangeline of Meridia had proven to be an invaluable ally, her enthusiasm for innovative partnerships matched by a practical understanding of political realities. The Meridian delegation had set the tone for constructive engagement, and their detailed proposals had provided a framework that other kingdoms could build upon. Prince Henrik of Valdres had surprised everyone by arriving personally rather than sending a representative. His reputation as an isolationist had led many to expect a cautious, defensive approach, but instead he had brought proposals for technological cooperation that were even more ambitious than Astoria's initial vision. The delegation from Thornhold was led by Princess Sophia, a brilliant young diplomat whose reputation for strategic thinking rivaled that of the most experienced ambassadors. Her kingdom's expertise in maritime trade had opened discussions about shared shipping routes and joint exploration ventures that could benefit all participating nations. Most surprising of all was the arrival of Count Dmitri from the eastern province of Drakmor, whose journey across contested territory to attend the conference had created international headlines. His presence at Astoria signaled a willingness to consider alternatives to the traditional alliance system that had kept Drakmor trapped between hostile powers for decades. The representatives from Luminora and the Mountain Kingdom of Steelgate had completed the initial group, each bringing unique strengths and perspectives that had enriched the preliminary discussions beyond anything Edmund had dared hope. A soft knock interrupted his morning contemplation, and Prince Alexander entered with a leather portfolio containing the final agenda for the day's proceedings. At his side walked Isabella, her face showing the careful balance of excitement and anxiety that had characterized everyone's mood during the final preparations. "Father," Alexander said, his voice carrying the confidence that had grown throughout the planning process, "the delegations are ready, and our staff has confirmed that all logistical arrangements are in place. The Great Hall has been configured to encourage collaborative discussion rather than formal presentations, just as we discussed." Isabella added, "The cultural exchange presentations that we prepared have been enthusiastically received by all the delegations. Several representatives have already mentioned specific projects they would like to pursue with their counterparts from other kingdoms. Edmund felt a surge of pride in his son and daughter-in-law's contributions to the conference planning. They had thrown themselves into every detail with an energy and creativity that had impressed even the most experienced diplomats. Alexander's natural leadership abilities had flourished as he coordinated the complex logistics, while Isabella's gift for seeing connections between seemingly disparate ideas had helped shape many of the innovative proposals that would be discussed. Any last-minute concerns or complications? Edmund asked, knowing that in diplomacy, the most dangerous problems often emerged when success seemed closest. Alexander consulted his notes briefly. Lord Chancellor Blackwood reports that all security arrangements are finalized, and our intelligence sources indicate no signs of external interference or sabotage attempts. The participating kingdoms have honored their commitment to approach these discussions in good faith. The reassurance was welcome, but Edmund knew that the greatest threats to the conference's success would come not from external enemies, but from the natural caution and self-interest that drove all international relations. Each kingdom had domestic constituencies to satisfy, and the pressure to achieve immediate, visible benefits could easily overwhelm the longer-term thinking that innovative partnerships required. Queen Cordelia appeared in the doorway, resplendent in the formal regalia that marked her role as Astoria's chief diplomatic representative. Her presence immediately elevated the atmosphere in the room, and Edmund felt the familiar sense of partnership and shared purpose that had guided their marriage through 20 years of challenges and triumphs. "My dear family," she said with a smile that encompassed both warmth and determination, "are we ready to make history?" The question carried both excitement and responsibility. They weren't just hosting a diplomatic conference. They were attempting to demonstrate that centuries of competitive, zero-sum thinking could be replaced by collaborative approaches that benefited everyone involved. "Mother," Alexander replied with growing confidence, "I believe we're as ready as anyone can be for something that's never been attempted before. The preliminary discussions have been more positive than we dared hope, and the proposals that have emerged are truly revolutionary." Isabella nodded in agreement. "Your Majesty, the enthusiasm from all the delegations has been remarkable. They're not just here because they need alternatives to the current system. They're here because they believe we can create something better." Edmund looked at his family with deep appreciation for how they had risen to this challenge. The crisis that had nearly torn them apart just weeks ago had instead revealed strengths and capabilities that none of them had fully recognized. Their unity had become the foundation for Astoria's bold new direction, and their shared commitment to innovative solutions had inspired representatives from across the continent. "Before we join our guests," Edmund said, his voice carrying both solemnity and hope, "I want to acknowledge what we've accomplished together. Regardless of what happens in the coming days, we've already demonstrated that love, trust, and shared values can overcome seemingly impossible obstacles." The family shared a moment of quiet reflection, understanding that they were about to step into a situation that would test everything they had learned about diplomacy, leadership, and the delicate art of building consensus among competing interests. Lord Chancellor Blackwood appeared to escort them to the Great Hall, and as they walked through the corridors of Ravenspire Castle, Edmund noted the subtle changes that had occurred over the past 2 weeks. Servants moved with purpose and pride, their usual efficiency enhanced by a sense that they were participating in something truly significant. Even the castle itself seemed to radiate an energy that matched the historic importance of the events unfolding within its ancient walls. The Great Hall had been transformed from its traditional formal configuration into something more resembling an ancient amphitheater. Instead of a single long table with rigid seating arrangements, 6 curved tables formed a circle, with Astoria's delegation positioned to facilitate discussion rather than to dominate proceedings. The arrangement encouraged eye contact and direct communication between all participants, while the carefully planned acoustics ensured that every voice could be heard clearly. As the royal family entered, the assembled representatives rose in a gesture of respect that felt more like mutual recognition among equals than traditional diplomatic protocol. The atmosphere in the room was electric with anticipation, and Edmund could see in every face the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that he felt in his own heart. Lady Evangeline of Meridia caught Edmund's eye and nodded slightly, her expression conveying both gratitude for Astoria's leadership and confidence in the process they were about to begin. Prince Henrik of Valdres stood tall and serious, his reputation for careful deliberation evident in his thoughtful expression as he surveyed the assembled group. Princess Sophia of Thornhold radiated the intellectual excitement that had characterized all her contributions to the preliminary discussions, while Count Dimitri's presence continued to serve as a powerful symbol of the courage required to break free from traditional constraints. The representatives from La Minora and Steelgate completed the circle, each bringing their own perspectives and expertise to what promised to be the most comprehensive reimagining of international relations in centuries. Edmund took his place at the Astorian table, with Queen Cordelia, Prince Alexander, and Princess Isabella arranged to maximize their collective diplomatic strengths. The carefully planned seating had been designed to encourage collaborative discussion while maintaining appropriate respect for protocol and tradition. Distinguished representatives, Edmund began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. We gather today not as competitors seeking advantage over one another, but as partners exploring how our shared strengths can create prosperity and security for all our peoples. The opening words had been carefully chosen to set a tone of collaboration rather than negotiation, and the response from around the circle was immediately positive. Edmund could see heads nodding and expressions of agreement from every delegation. Lady Evangeline was the first to respond, her clear voice carrying the enthusiasm that had characterized Meridia's approach from the beginning. Your Majesty, on behalf of all the kingdoms represented here, I want to express our gratitude for Astoria's vision and courage in convening this gathering. The traditional approaches to international relations have failed our peoples, and we are here to explore whether we can do better. Prince Henrik leaned forward, his serious demeanor commanding attention as he spoke. King Edmund, the preliminary proposals we have reviewed suggest possibilities that could transform not just our relationships with each other, but our relationships with our own citizens. When kingdoms cooperate instead of compete, resources that would have been spent on military preparations can be invested in education, infrastructure, and innovation. Princess Sophia's contribution built naturally on Henrik's observation. Your Royal Highness makes an excellent point about domestic benefits, but I believe the international implications are even more significant. The old system of alliances created a continental chessboard where smaller kingdoms were pawns in conflicts between larger powers. What we're discussing here could free all of us from that destructive dynamic. Count Dimitri's voice carried the weight of personal experience when he added, Princess Sophia speaks truth that resonates deeply with Drakmore's situation. For too long, we have been forced to choose between bad options and worse ones. The possibility of partnerships based on mutual benefit rather than mutual defense offers hope for a different kind of future. The opening exchanges had established exactly the tone Edmund had hoped for. Serious, substantive discussion among equals who shared a commitment to finding better solutions. But he knew that the real test would come when they moved from general principles to specific commitments. Queen Cordelia smoothly transitioned the discussion to more concrete matters. Distinguished colleagues, the enthusiasm and wisdom we've heard this morning gives me great hope for our deliberations. Perhaps it would be helpful to begin examining specific proposals that could serve as models for the new partnerships we envision. She gestured to Isabella, who rose gracefully to present the cultural exchange initiatives that had captured everyone's imagination during the preliminary discussions. Honored representatives, Isabella began, her voice carrying both confidence and excitement. We propose beginning our new partnerships with programs that create direct connections between our peoples. When citizens of different kingdoms work together on shared projects, they build understanding and trust that transcends political boundaries. Isabella's presentation outlined specific proposals for student exchanges, joint artistic projects, and collaborative research initiatives that could begin immediately while larger economic and political partnerships were being developed. Her examples were concrete and practical, designed to demonstrate immediate benefits while building the foundation for more ambitious cooperation. Prince Alexander followed with proposals for economic partnerships that went far beyond traditional trade agreements. His vision encompassed shared infrastructure projects, joint investment in emerging technologies, and coordinated responses to economic challenges that affected multiple kingdoms. The goal, Alexander explained, is not to create economic dependencies, but to develop interdependencies that make all of us stronger. When our prosperity is linked to our partner's success, we have powerful incentives to help each other overcome challenges and pursue opportunities. The presentations continued throughout the morning, with each delegation contributing ideas that built upon and enhanced the proposals from their colleagues. The synergy that emerged was remarkable. Instead of competing visions, they were developing a comprehensive framework that incorporated the best insights from every kingdom. As the morning session concluded, Edmund felt a cautious optimism that the conference might indeed achieve something historic. The preliminary discussions had established common ground and shared objectives, but the real challenges would begin that afternoon when they started negotiating specific agreements and commitments. During the midday recess, delegations mingled informally in the castle gardens, continuing conversations that had begun in the formal sessions. Edmund watched from his study window as representatives from different kingdoms walked together, their animated discussions suggesting that the collaborative spirit was continuing outside the structured environment of the Great Hall. Lady Caroline approached Isabella with a leather portfolio, and Edmund could see the excitement in both young women's faces as they discussed something that had clearly captured their imagination. Their friendship had been crucial to the events that led to this conference, and their continued collaboration suggested that the next generation of leaders was already thinking beyond the traditional constraints that had limited their predecessors. Queen Cordelia joined Edmund at the window, her expression reflecting the same mixture of hope and caution that he felt. "The morning went better than I dared expect," she said quietly. "But this afternoon will test whether good intentions can be transformed into binding commitments." Edmund nodded, understanding the challenge they faced. Diplomatic conferences often produced inspiring rhetoric and vague promises of cooperation, but creating specific, enforceable agreements required navigating the complex realities of domestic politics, economic constraints, and competing national interests. "The key," he replied thoughtfully, "will be ensuring that our agreements create immediate, visible benefits for all participants. If people in every kingdom can see concrete improvements in their lives within the first year, it will create momentum for larger initiatives." As they prepared to return to the Great Hall for the afternoon session, Edmund felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. The next few hours would determine whether their bold experiment would become a model for a new era of international cooperation or a cautionary tale about the dangers of diplomatic overreach. The stakes could not have been higher, but as he looked at his family and thought about the dedicated representatives they would be working with, Edmund felt confident that they had the wisdom, courage, and commitment necessary to make their revolutionary vision a reality. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Great Hall as the delegates returned from their midday recess, their informal conversations having created an atmosphere of cautious optimism mixed with growing determination. King Edmund could sense the subtle shift in mood. The morning's presentations had established shared vision, but now came the delicate work of transforming inspiration into binding commitments. As the representatives took their seats in the circular arrangement that had fostered such productive discussion, Edmund noticed that several delegations had rearranged themselves slightly. Lady Evangeline now sat beside Prince Henrik, their animated conversation during the recess having apparently revealed new areas of mutual interest. Princess Sophia had positioned herself where she could easily communicate with Count Dmitri, and even the traditionally formal representatives from Limonora appeared more relaxed and engaged. The changes were subtle but significant, suggesting that the collaborative atmosphere was genuine rather than merely diplomatic courtesy. Edmund felt a surge of hope that their bold experiment might indeed produce the revolutionary results they had envisioned. Queen Cordelia called the afternoon session to order with a grace that commanded immediate attention while maintaining the collaborative tone they had established. "Distinguished colleagues, our morning discussions have revealed remarkable consensus about our shared objectives. This afternoon, we turn to the more challenging but equally important task of creating specific agreements that can transform our vision into reality." She gestured to Lord Chancellor Blackwood, who had spent the midday recess preparing detailed summaries of the proposals that had emerged from the morning session. His presentation would serve as the foundation for the afternoon's negotiations, providing a clear framework for moving from general principles to binding commitments. "Your Majesties and Highnesses," Blackwood began, his voice carrying the precise authority that had made him invaluable in countless diplomatic negotiations. "The proposals discussed this morning fall into three main categories: immediate collaborative initiatives that can begin within 60 days, medium-term partnership projects requiring 6 months to 2 years for implementation, and long-term structural changes that will require careful planning and gradual development over the next decade." The systematic approach helped focus the discussion on practical next steps rather than abstract possibilities. Edmund watched as representatives took notes and consulted among themselves, their serious attention to detail suggesting that they were prepared to move beyond rhetoric to genuine commitments. Lady Evangeline was the first to respond, her enthusiasm undimmed by the shift to more technical considerations. Lord Chancellor, Meridia is prepared to commit immediately to the cultural exchange programs outlined by Princess Isabella. We have identified 12 scholars and 6 master craftsmen who could begin collaborations with Astrian counterparts before the end of this month. Her concrete offer created exactly the momentum Edmund had hoped for. Prince Henrik immediately followed with a complimentary proposal. Valdris can provide technological expertise for the joint infrastructure projects that Prince Alexander described. Our engineers have developed new techniques for road construction that could benefit all participating kingdoms, and we would welcome the opportunity to share this knowledge while learning from our partners' innovations. The pattern continued as each delegation offered specific contributions that built upon their colleagues' commitments. Princess Sophia proposed establishing shared shipping routes that would reduce transportation costs for all participants, while Count Dmitri offered Drakmor as a testing ground for new forms of cooperative governance in border regions. As the offers accumulated, Edmund could see the outline of something truly unprecedented taking shape. Instead of the traditional bilateral agreements that characterized most diplomacy, they were creating a web of multilateral partnerships that could grow stronger and more beneficial over time. But even as optimism grew, practical challenges emerged. The representative from Luminora, Minister Helena Brightwater, raised concerns that had been quietly troubling several delegations. Your Majesty, she said with diplomatic caution, while Luminora shares the enthusiasm for these innovative partnerships, we must address the question of how these agreements will be enforced. The absence of traditional alliance structures means we need new mechanisms for ensuring that commitments are honored. The question struck at the heart of one of diplomacy's oldest problems, creating trust between sovereign powers who had no higher authority to enforce their agreements. Traditional alliances relied on the threat of mutual defense obligations, but the new partnership model required different forms of accountability. Prince Alexander had anticipated this challenge and was ready with a carefully considered response. Minister Brightwater raises a crucial point, and we believe the solution lies in creating what we might call progressive accountability. Instead of relying on punitive measures for noncompliance, we propose positive incentives for exceeding commitments. Alexander's explanation outlined a system where kingdoms that demonstrated exceptional commitment to shared projects would gain access to increasingly beneficial partnership opportunities. Instead of punishment for failure, the model offered escalating rewards for success. Isabella built upon her husband's proposal with specific examples. For instance, kingdoms that successfully complete their first-year cultural exchange commitments could be invited to participate in the more ambitious joint research initiatives planned for year 2. Success would literally unlock new opportunities for cooperation. The innovative approach addressed Minister Brightwater's concerns while maintaining the collaborative spirit that had characterized the entire conference. Count Dmitri immediately expressed support for the concept, noting that it aligned with Drakmor's preference for positive incentives over coercive enforcement. Queen Cordelia skillfully guided the discussion toward the document that would formalize their agreements. Distinguished colleagues, I believe we have reached the point where we should begin drafting the framework agreement that will establish our new partnership network. Lord Chancellor Blackwood has prepared a preliminary text that incorporates the proposals we have discussed. The next 2 hours were spent in the painstaking work of diplomatic drafting, as each phrase and commitment was carefully examined to ensure clarity, enforceability, and mutual benefit. The process revealed the depth of thought that had gone into the preliminary proposals, as potential conflicts and ambiguities were identified and resolved through collaborative problem-solving. Edmund found himself impressed by the maturity and wisdom displayed by all the representatives. Instead of the typical diplomatic maneuvering aimed at securing advantage, each delegation seemed genuinely committed to finding solutions that would benefit everyone. The collaborative spirit that had emerged was more than mere courtesy. It reflected a shared understanding that their success depended entirely on their ability to make the partnership work for all participants. As evening approached, the framework agreement began to take final shape. The document was unlike any diplomatic treaty in history, establishing not rigid obligations, but flexible partnerships that could evolve based on changing circumstances and growing trust. The final version established 3 levels of commitment. The foundation partnership required all participating kingdoms to implement basic cultural exchange and economic cooperation programs within the first year. The enhanced partnership offered additional benefits to kingdoms that exceeded their foundation commitments, including access to shared technological development and coordinated infrastructure projects. The advanced partnership created opportunities for the deepest levels of cooperation, including joint governance of shared resources and collaborative foreign policy initiatives. Most revolutionary of all was the document's provision for what they called graduated sovereignty in specific areas. Participating kingdoms could voluntarily pool their authority in designated zones to achieve objectives that none could accomplish alone. The concept was untested in practice, but the theoretical framework provided a mechanism for unprecedented cooperation while maintaining each kingdom's fundamental independence. As the sun set over Ravenspire Castle, casting golden light through the tall windows of the Great Hall, the delegates prepared for the formal signing ceremony that would make their agreements official. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and the knowledge that they were about to make history. Edmund stood to address the assembly one final time before the signing began. "Distinguished friends and partners," he said, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "We have accomplished something remarkable today. We have proven that competition and mutual suspicion are not the only possible foundations for international relations. We have shown that shared prosperity and collaborative problem-solving can create security and opportunity that surpasses anything achievable through traditional alliances." He paused to look around the circle, meeting the eyes of each representative. "But our real work begins tomorrow. The agreements we sign tonight are not endpoints, but beginning points. They represent our commitment to building something better. But the success of our experiment will depend on how well we implement these agreements in the months and years to come." Lady Evangeline rose to respond on behalf of all the delegates. "Your Majesty, on behalf of all the kingdoms represented here, I want to express our profound gratitude for Historia's leadership and vision. You have given us all the opportunity to participate in creating a new model for how nations can relate to each other. We leave here not just as signatories to an agreement, but as partners in building a better future for all our peoples." The signing ceremony proceeded with appropriate solemnity, each representative affixing their seal to the document that would be known to history as the Charter of Cooperative.